Hi everyone, my name is Deborah Nyangulu and I am a researcher based at the University of Bremen in Germany, and I am here at the Osher Map Library and Smith Center for Cartographic Education at the University of Southern Maine in Portland. I'll be here talking to the executive director of the library and the center and to some of the experts working there. So I don't want to preempt what we are going to discuss, but I just want to give you a brief introduction that this is a great resource for everything cartographic. They have some great maps, some maps of like Palestine dating back to 1475, maps from all over the world. So if you are a researcher or you're just someone who's curious, you want to know about the world, because maps define who we are, they define our special relations, they define our relationship to land. And right at this moment, they're at the center of much of the conflicts that are happening in the world. So this is a great resource where you can find factual information and look into the histories of map making, of cartography, how, for example, it has influenced settler colonialism. I just wanted to say something about the word Osher itself. I just looked this up. This is a Hebrew word which means happiness, joy, delight. And I think when you come here and do some research, you'll be able maybe to think of bringing something like Osher and Farah together, the Hebrew word for happiness and the Arabic word for happiness. So bringing this together and sort of have that double happiness, maybe to find joy in these times of where. Yes, hello and good afternoon, everyone, to our viewers all over the world. I'm here at the Osher Map Library, and my guest today is Dr. Libby Bischof. She'll be introducing herself in a second, and she'll also be introducing the center, the Osher Map Library, and we'll talk more about why we're here. But I think first of all, let's just go straight into it. You tell people who you are, and then you also tell them what the Osher Map Library and Cartographic Center is.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for hosting, and thank you so much for visiting us all the way from Germany. My name is Libby Bischof. I'm the executive director of the Osher Map Library and Smith Center for Cartographic Education here at the University of Southern Maine in Portland, Maine. I have been at the university for 18 years. I am also a professor of history and the university historian. So I wear 3 hats, but my primary job these days since 2018 is as the executive director of the Map Library. The library itself began in the late 1980s when the Smith family donated their collection of rare maps, globes, and atlases to the university. We used to be one room on our Gorham campus in the library there, and over time, as Dr. Harold Osher and his wife Peggy Osher got involved and started giving their collections to the university in the 90s, we moved to the library in Portland, and then the space we're in today was built between 2007 and 2009. So we have been in this space for about 16 years.
Okay. And so with the collection, all the material you have is from these donations that you received?
No.
Where do you get the stuff from?
Where do we get the stuff? From all over. So we have about 500,000 items dating back to the year 1475. We collect locally here in Maine as well as globally. Our collecting priorities have shifted over time. So the Smith family and the Osher family, their very generous donations of materials form the rare heart of our collection. They were very interested in cartography and maps being made between like the 15th and the 18th centuries. So we get our materials really in 2 ways. Either folks donate them to us, which there isn't a week that goes by where someone doesn't offer to give us some sort of map or cartographic item writ large, or we purchase them. So Dr. Osher passed away about a year and a half ago at age 99. He lived a very long life. But one of the things that was really important to him that he used to tell me all the time, that acquisitions are like new materials are really the lifeblood of any collection in terms of being able to react to the time period we're in, and also make the collection reflect the people who are using it and accessing it. So he left a bequest that would enable us to continue to purchase maps.
Oh, okay. But you said that it's not just maps. cartography.
Yeah,
References
all kinds
writ
of items writ
large.
large. And that, I think we were talking earlier, and people have very specific notions of what a map might be or could be. And certainly our faculty scholar, Dr. Matthew Edney, can talk more about that later as well. But for us, it is all kinds of cartographic items, and maps appear in different places and on different objects. So we have a lot of maps that are contained in books, sometimes as illustration or as part of the research. We have atlases, bound collections of maps. We certainly collect globes, but also we have an intern here this summer working on survey instruments and teaching objects. We have a lot of items in the collection that would tell someone how geography and history were taught since the 17th century in different parts of the world. We're as likely to have a text in German as we are to have one in English. So the collection is really global in scope. But yeah, we specifically add to it. We also have a huge board game collection.
Okay.
Showing travel, tourism, transportation. We have a lot of guidebooks from different places all over the world. So really broadly conceived, things that have to do with place and landscape and people's interactions with them.
Okay, so maybe just as an example, this beautiful piece just right next to us. Is this a map? Can you say something about it?
This has been a big question since we acquired. It's a painting.
Okay.
It is very much a painting. It is done by Billy Gérard Frank, who is a West Indian artist who does a lot of work in New York City and in Maine. And this is a series that he's been working on for well over a decade called Indigo Entanglements. So this is Indigo Entanglements number 6. And Billy's gallerist is Moss Galleries, which is here in Maine. And Billy, his artistic practice is very archival. So as an artist, he's a multimedia artist. He's a printmaker. He's a filmmaker. He's a painter. He does not limit himself to one form. And he spends a lot of time in archives and libraries doing archival research. He loves to look at maps. He loves to look at documents. He loves to look at bills of sale, of ledgers, all in a way to inform his practice. And he takes this archival work and these notions of memory and experience and puts them all together on film or on canvas. So in this particular piece, Billy reckons with New England's legacy with the transatlantic trade and the slave trade. And so specifically looking at the English colonization of Maine and their desire for the tall pines to make masts for the ships, looking at early merchants and shipbuilders. But his father in the West Indies was a boat builder. So he sewed this canvas like a sail. And he takes cloth from Africa, cowrie shells, indigo, and weaves that into his work. So that's cloth that's literally on the canvas. He's also a printmaker. So he took Phyllis Wheatley, who was enslaved in Boston and became a really prominent Black poet in Boston in the 18th century. And this is in the 19th century. And this is Anthony Burns, who was put on trial in 1854 in the city of Boston. Because he had run away from slavery. And there was a federal law that said anyone who had escaped and was caught, regardless of where they were, even if they were in a sanctuary state and city like Boston, would be sent back. And so this trial caused a huge riot in the city of Boston in the 1850s, and he was sent back. So he takes these archival pieces, these maps. This is a 17th century map of the continent of Africa by Willem Blau, to tell a larger story, to put these pieces in conversation. And why I really wanted to acquire this painting, Billy really wanted some of his work in a library. It's really important to him that a space that he works in also has his kind of work. We also work with thousands of students. And at the end of the day, what we really try to do is take historic pieces from over 500 years and put them in conversation with one another. And that's what Billy's doing in his work. So people will ask different questions and come to their own conclusions. So for us, this painting really symbolizes a lot of our critical and reflective work, and also allows us to teach with it and through it. In New England, historically, in the United States, you see a lot of folks associating slavery with the South, where the bulk of it took place, and sort of almost absolving the North and New England from that process. But it wasn't. There were enslaved peoples in what became Massachusetts until 1783. When Massachusetts became a state, it outlawed slavery. New York didn't outlaw slavery until 1820. So this notion that slavery was just a Southern colonial practice is not historically accurate. And so New England is also involved in this. Like, we build the ships. The cotton that's coming from the textile mills is being picked in the South. The sugar that's being refined in cities like Portland, who are very well known as a sugar refinery, is coming from enslaved labor in the West Indies. And so Billy's work is really making that visible, so people can, it's like a reckoning. And so people can have these kind of conversations. And that's what we hope that people can do when they're in here and working with the collections.
Yeah, I mean, but this is sort of a counter mapping to the dominant.
Very much so.
Yeah, to the dominant colonial maps. But in the collection, you also have a lot of these dominant colonial maps produced in the context of slavery, produced in the context of imperialism, very patriarchal, very sexist. So what is like your policy on exhibiting such material? And, you know, because there's also a huge debate about such historical items. Should they be exhibited? What sort of descriptions should you put on them, or for today's audiences, or should they not be exhibited? So what's your policy on all this, and how do you handle all this? Thanks.
This is a good question, and a complicated one, but one that's really important to me. So I think it's important for me to say that there are all different kinds of people who run spaces like this. And I'm an historian by trade and by temperament. And I'm a teaching historian. I'm a public historian. So I'm also an educator. So as an educator running a specialized collection and a map library, I think the way I approach things is different than some folks. It's interesting. We have a lot of people come in or to see exhibits, and I've had people look at me and say, all the stuff that everyone else seems to be hiding away, you're like bringing out on display and putting it in conversation and context. We're not trying to hide any parts of our collection or to censor any parts of our collection. We are a teaching library. We are wholly focused on educational access. Context is really important. We like to be able to put the pieces we have in context. So anyone who had a map collection is going to have imperial and colonial items. That maps are tools of power and dominance in that era. And so we have a lot of those materials. We think that they should be accessible to folks both in person, seeing it here, and online. And we're constantly going through our cataloging practices, our metadata, to provide more updated context. But we don't change the names of things. We don't change language of something that has a particular title. But we do work online on sort of tagging the items and keep updated on policies. And just so we have collecting priorities. And right now they're maps made by women, maps made by people of color, and maps showing Indigenous land possession and dispossession. That doesn't mean that's all we buy, but when I have a student or someone come into an archive or a class comes into the archive, I want people to be able to see themselves in the collection and not just in a negative light. Like, you shouldn't be an Indigenous student and walk in and only see yourself reflected as past, as history, which is so often the case. So what are contemporary Indigenous map makers doing? And we bring those items into the collection. What how does someone map Black excellence or Black joy? We also bring those items into the collection. So countermapping is important, but putting these things side by side are really important. So I think one of the major ways in which we handle it in teaching is that we're not just pulling one item, we're pulling like 20 and working with the educator, whatever their goal is. Maybe you're doing social work, maybe you're looking at social movements and protest, maybe you're looking at land use, maybe you're teaching a statistics class and you want to look at mapping and projection, maybe you're nursing and you want to do close looking. We want to put those materials in context so people can see them. We also want people to be able to make a choice in a class with what they encounter. A lot of maps, pictorial, like illustrated maps from the 1930s are incredibly racist. And so we're not going to take an otherwise sort of like happy-go-lucky map of Florida from the 1930s. And if it has a racist depiction, we're like not going to throw that up on our Instagram account or our social media account, right? And sort of ignore that's there. But in a class or in an exhibit where things can be contextualized or for researchers, absolutely. Because hiding the material, I feel, is equally complicit, right? Like that's part of the problem. Like that's just denying that these things exist and were the dominant sort of practice at the time. I mean, I use, as an historian, maps for me are primary sources that tell us a lot about the time periods in which they were created. So if you're studying that time period, you should see what people's opinions were. And it's difficult to broaden the collections in that way. I'll just give you one example. So if one of our collecting priorities is maps made by women and another is maps made by people of color, right? There is one American Black woman cartographer that we know of in the 20th century, Louise Jefferson. We have a lot of items that she made in our collection. There have to be more, right? There's like one 19th century Black male cartographer that we know about. There have to be more. So how do we make these things more visible? In the United States, one of the things that you'll see after George Floyd was murdered in 2020, a lot of museums issued a lot of anti-racism statements. A lot of people changed their collecting policies. So the market for people diversifying their collections, it's changed the way people collect. So materials that people weren't paying attention to 5 or 10 years ago, they weren't trying to put them in their collection. A lot of institutions are trying to put them in their collection now. And we were doing that before 2020. So I think really being able to react to to collect things that are important in the present and to be able to put them in discussion with objects from the past and let people draw their own conclusions from them is really important. Are there certain things I wouldn't put online? Yeah, I can give you an example. So we collect a lot of materials from the 1960s. They're really popular in class, protest movements, things like that have maps in them. One of the things we purchased in the past few years was a really interesting document that came out of Chicago in 1968. In the middle of it, it has a recipe for a Molotov cocktail. I don't have any interest in putting a recipe for a Molotov cocktail online, but we'll put the rest of it on there. And if you wanted to come in and see that object, you could come in and see it. So I think we have to take things piece by piece. But yeah, I mean, some of the best conversations we have with students and that students have with one another are with textbooks from the 19th century. Every geography textbook from about 1840 till the end of the First World War has a chapter called The Races of Men, where they put people in categories. And students see themselves immediately how problematic that is. And then they immediately turn to their textbooks today and say, when did they stop doing this? Why? How are our textbooks still problematic? Who's telling the story? Who is it for? Right? So we're trying to teach this kind of source analysis and awareness that students can then take into other work. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but also really important. And everybody has different opinions about it, as you well know.
Yeah, so I think maybe because, we'll be going to look at some of these pieces and we'll talk about them. So, maybe just before we go quickly, like in a minute or so, can you just talk about the digitization process itself, how it's going, the challenges and the advantages?
Sure. So we are a physical library in Portland, Maine, in the United States, and we know that not everybody can physically come here to visit us and access our items. And to Dr. Osher's and others of our founders and patrons, access, and to us, access is really important. And so for us, digitization is about accessing the collections, and really having people from all over the world able to look at our collections and to use them, right? From anything from their own scholarship to teaching to, we have people use our maps for album covers or documentaries, or students who just want to print something and put it in their room. All of that is fine. We've been doing it since 2009. We were really early adopters of digitization in this way. So one of the challenges is you're never going to be able to digitize everything in your collection. So how do you choose what you digitize and what you prioritize? And storing it is also a challenge because you want to make it really accessible and high resolution to people. So we don't do mass digitization, we do custom digitization. So we have 3 folks who work in our collections and we only photograph things. We don't use scanners. So really putting high quality images out there so people can get as close to the real thing as they can and zoom in. We also don't watermark our images. We don't alter them. They really are for accessing what the item is and making it look in all ways. And as technology gets better, say you start digitizing your collection in 2009, it's 2025. Part of being like a really good steward of digitization is we reshoot things all the time with better camera technology in 2025 than we had in 2011. So then you have a reshooting schedule where you're constantly updating. We, in the United States, the federal libraries and Library of Congress and Smithsonian museums got together and made a series of guidelines on cultural heritage digitization called FADGI. We adhere to those. The rest of the world has more of them. So yeah, the challenge is time and making them accessible and prioritizing. But that's how so many people find us and then come in and see them, like you did.
Yes, like I did. And I think it's now time for us to look at the maps and especially at your oldest map and other maps that I also want to look at. And I think we should just go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So this is your oldest map in the collection. It's a map of Palestine from 1475.
Yeah.
Can you say something a bit more about this map and where you got it from? And yeah, because usually when people think of the map of Palestine, we usually think of something like this with the place names and then the borders. But can you say something about the map?
Yeah, sure. So our oldest map is indeed from 1475, and it's a Lucas Brandis map of Palestine, but also the Holy Land and the walled city of Jerusalem. So I will invite my colleagues Matthew and Louis to talk a little bit more about the map itself, as they're more scholars of this particular map. But this is part of Dr. Harold Osher's collection that he gave to the library. It was really important for Harold to, as a philanthropist, as a Jewish philanthropist especially, like he had a large collection of Judaica and maps of the Holy Land writ large. This was just a part of the world that he was interested in addition to everything else. So he was very likely to collect things. This is one of the first modern maps. I'll let Matthew and Louis talk a little bit more about that and why. But for us, this is very much something that was important to Dr. Osher. And so it also is biblical mapping. So yes, you can see the cities. You can see Gaza right down here on the water. You can see the walled city of Jerusalem, but you're also looking at Calvary and the crucifixion of Christ. You are also looking at Moses receiving the tablets. So it is also mapping the Bible itself as well. So that's a big part of it.
So my name is Louis Miller. I am the Assistant Director for Research and Fellowship Programs here at the Osher Map Library, Smith Center for Cartographic Education. And I'm also the Cartographic Reference and Teaching Librarian, which means I teach a lot of the undergrad and graduate courses that use OML materials, as well as working with researchers such as yourself, utilizing the collection and identifying materials and things like that. So this map here, as Libby introduced it, is one of my favorite pieces in the collection, partly because I think, my job here in some ways to this map, and that when I was interviewing in the final interview, I selected this to give a presentation on. And just not to repeat some of the things that Libby mentioned, I mean, I do love the scenes from the Bible that you see on this map. But another thing that's really fascinating about this particular map is that though it's supposedly based off of an earlier map, that the compiler of this map comes out of a book from 1475 called the Rudimentum Novitiorum. The compiler of that book had access to this earlier manuscript, a couple hundred years old at this point, of a journey to the Holy Land. And there was supposedly a map that came along with it that then the Lucas Brandis, the printer, had access to make this map. Now, there's a couple different versions of that manuscript that float around, and the map does not survive. So it's a little bit unclear as to how much of this map is Brandis's own, or the people working for Brandis's own invention, versus the existing map that we know the text was at least utilized for this book. But one of the key features of this map, and the advertisement for the book from the year of its publication actually mentions this, is that this map particularly allows you to understand the Bible spatially. So there are certain places on this map that will tell you where to go in the Bible to see where that is the setting of the story. So you have here, for example, this place Sochot, 1 RE for First Kings in Latin, and then 17, and then IO for John 21. And one of the other things, to be aware of with something this old is that our books of the Bible do not match up to these. So in the medieval Latin Vulgate Bible, there are 1st through 4 Kings. We have 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then 1st and 2nd Kings. So if for a modern Bible, we'd have to go to 1st Samuel. But if we go to chapter 17, Soho is where the action is taking place. So it's absolutely brilliant. If it was the invention of Brandis or someone in his shop, I just find an absolutely brilliant idea. And 3 years later, this same printer, Lucas Brandis, made a different book, and there's a map in that has no pictorial elements, just places named in spatial relationship to each other. And after each of those places is the page number of the volume, where you can learn about that place. Some interesting word mapping going on, different ways to access things. I think, a lot of times we think of the 21st century as being this place where we're experimenting and trying to figure out how can people get into these sources and texts in different ways. And boom, from 550 years ago is an example that shows you that they're already thinking through that sort of stuff. So I absolutely love this and could go on ad nauseum, but I'm going to stop there.
So I still just want to ask a question. But this map is taught from a Christian biblical perspective.
Yes.
So it's still there's that sort of one-dimensional view to it. So, how do we critically read maps such as these today?
Yes. Well, I think that, we know that maps are sociocultural artifacts, and that while they can be used for navigation, as many of these out here could be, that's often not their intended purpose. And that is not the purpose of this map as it existed in this book. So I think what we always try to teach people is that there's so many different contexts for any one of these pieces that you just need to try to at least wrap your head around that there's a bunch of them. You might not be able to know all of them, but you should try to educate yourself in as much as possible. So not only do you want to know that this is out of a book, right? A lot of these maps that we have that are old are flat. They look like someone just bought them on the street as they are, but no, they came in a book. You were reading them in context with other things. Also, who consumed this information? So one of the things that's always a struggle for us is what did the producers intend? How did the producers fund this? How do they make this? But also, how did the consumers of this actually interact with it and make use of it? And what were they using it for? And how did that shift over time? Because is someone in the year 1850 using this map the same way someone in the year 1475 was? Maybe in some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, probably not. And so I'm sort of punting on your question a little bit. But I think that the one-sidedness or the sort of cultural context of this is actually a benefit to it, not a drawback. I think that once we can place it in its context of this is pre-Reformation, Holy Roman Empire, that's what allows us to really engage with, as much as we can, the creator's intentions. And then now, knowing what we have in 500 plus years of history afterwards, the memory of the Holy Land and of Palestine and how that's been depicted and in different cultures, this is one such example that fits into that broader narrative. And so while this particular piece is a showstopper, it's also part of a larger ecosystem of maps, many of which are out here today.
My name is Matthew Edney. I am the Osher Professor in the History of Cartography here at USM, and which means I'm a faculty member. I live in the library. I make the librarian's life hard, but I teach with the maps, and I've helped develop this collection since 1995.
So, I was just talking with Louis, and he just gave us a bit of background and the context to this map from 1475 of Palestine. And he talked about the biblical context, understanding this map within that context, but also trying to understand how ideas of cartography, of mapping change over time. And of course, we look at this map, and I think the map that people usually associate with Palestine nowadays is one which looks like this.
Sure.
The one where you have place names and you have borders. Here we sort of saw more relations between the biblical stories, the biblical relations between the land and the stories. But here we see place names and we see lots of borders. So maybe can you just talk about these shifts in mapping, in cartography, and how this sort of contributes to the stories of dispossession and of land?
Surely. So the first thing to do when you start looking at a map, and in many respects, the first thing you're going to do is look at many maps together. No one map will stand by itself. But the first thing to do is to figure out why the map was made and the kind of spatial concepts that it's showing. And so most of the maps we have out here are what we can call geographical maps, regional maps. They're maps made to show the nature of the world, what the world should be like, how it's organized from the point of view of the producing culture, as opposed to a marine chart, which is specifically used by mariners for oceanic navigation, as opposed to a property plan or a city plan. There are multiple modes of mapping. And so the very first thing you have to do is figure out what kind of mode are we dealing with. So these are all geographical maps. They're about trying to understand the nature of a region. So then you can start thinking about the material nature of these works. So as Louis mentioned, this came out of a book. And if we turn it over, you can see that there's writing on the verso of, at least of this side, is water stain and all the rest of it. But it came out of a book. And so the first thing to do to read this puppy, and puppy is a technical term, the first thing to do to read this puppy is to put it into the context of his parent work, Novitia Rudimentorum, which is this sort of a summary of everything you need to know if you're going to be an educated cleric. This one, on the other hand, which is much, much later, I know nothing about this map. I've never seen it before. Well, see, the first thing you do, if possible, okay, always check the verso, the reverse, because you never know what you can find. Is there printed lettering on there? Is there annotations, whatever? So we're looking at a map, and from this side you can see how it's been folded down, and plainly it folds down into this cover. Okay. So we've stored it large and flat, because paper, if you unfold and refold, it starts to wear the paper and it starts tearing. So this puppy is folded into a pamphlet. So someone is going to have bought this as a pamphlet. It's been distributed as a pamphlet, and it's been distributed by a publication called the Jewish Chronicle in English in Chancery Lane, London. So it's made by a commercial company, geographers, as part of Stanford's now. On behalf of this publication, we have a date of 1948 on there. So putting it into immediate post-war period, something that's going to be distributed by clearly this publication, maybe as an insert into an issue of this magazine or newspaper. Maybe it was given out as a freebie. A lot of newspapers use maps in the 20th century as a way to attract readership. Get a subscription to our journal, we'll give you a map. Then we can start to see then, okay, so this is part of a post-war educated, there's a price on here, 2 and 6, 2 shillings and 6pence, so 1/8 of a pound, 1948. That's quite a few pints of beer equivalent. It's something that's not cheap. It's not massively expensive, but it's something that's tied to a news agency that's distributing it for some reason. So the first thing you need to do is start looking at the Jewish Chronicle and start figuring out what's its political bias. Where's it coming from? Is it pro-Zionist? Is it pro-Jewish but anti-Zionist? Who knows? I don't. It's off the top of my head. And then you start looking at the map itself, and you can start to see that, well, it's got all these place names around the edge. It's clearly intended as a work of reference. It's something that people can find a place name that they're reading in the newspapers and locate them using the key onto the map. It's a very standard map in many respects. Main political areas get their own color. Palestine is green, Egypt is pink, was still called Transjordan, nowadays would be called Jordan, is yellow, and going up into Lebanon and Syria, again in pink and purple. And the colors are then matched into this regional plan so you can see where Palestine is. So this is a map of the British Mandate of Palestine after the Second World War, before the creation of the State of Israel. And then on top of that, you've got these boundaries. Boundaries are always very interesting. Here's Gaza. What these boundaries are, I don't quite know, because I don't know the precise territorial history. I know in the West Bank, which is this territory, is not being differentiated between the rest of Palestine. So,
and then East Jerusalem.
Right, and so Jerusalem is still its own territory. It hasn't been split as it will be with the formation of Israel. It's a map that's produced from the very modern point of view that the territory can be divided up into discrete and coherent and uniform political units. That there is Palestine, there's a neat border, and then there's Egypt. That the frontiers don't exist, that there's liminal spaces between states, which when you're on the ground do exist, both economically, linguistically, pragmatically, and nonetheless denied by this nice, neat borders, even running through the Dead Sea. So you've got space, politically controlled, divided up into some kind of system, which is very much a European Western way of thinking about how you structure territory, which by comparison to the Lucas Brandes map, which has nothing to do with territory. It's about a place, about a region. This is a region, this is a place, but it's a territory. It's been defined politically. Question then is, why? Why this definition? And that becomes a question of Jewish Chronicle, its political attitude, the particular moment when this was produced. Is it a work of reference? Is it a work of reference with a subtle suggestion of how Israel should become? Or I say Palestine should become? I don't know.
Okay. So maybe if I think we have to move on to other maps. I think when it comes to this question of territory, of territorial political maps and what they say, and especially the work that they do for empire, I think maybe it becomes much more clear when we also put it in the context. For example, if we look at some of the African maps, and there we're looking at the British Empire, I think it's much more explicit.
Want to move down here?
Yeah. We're just talking about the Palestine map and the British mandate of Palestine, and then we're sort of trying to move to look more at more examples of British colonialism. And here we have maps of Africa, I think, which show the extent of the British Empire. Like we have a map, I think, that's showing before and sort of after colonization. And also, I think in this map, we're seeing, I think these are sort of, it says it's, I think these are based on some of the work done by Dr. David Livingstone. So it's Rhodesia and Nyanza.
Right. So imperialism and colonialism in Africa, so these twin poles. There's what the Europeans thought they were doing in trying to divide up Africa amongst themselves, which is the imperial side. And then you got the colonial side, which is where the various powers are going into Africa and trying to set up and manage a series of territories to various degrees of success. The colonial work is grounded in extensive mapping. So this map here, let me just bring it around so we can see it a bit more carefully, is a great example of a 19th century map. It's pre-Treaty of Berlin, 1885, which is when the European powers divide up Africa amongst themselves, with, of course, no asking any African what they thought about the whole process. But it really captures the way in which all the Europeans moved into the interior of Africa primarily through the waterways. Waterways, as they were in North America for the French, Southeast Asia for the French for that matter, waterways are the key avenue. They allow you to move relatively quickly, relatively easily. And so we end up with a series of long, thin lines of rivers, maybe a few roads, areas of detail around Lake Nyasa here, but large areas of otherwise, quote, unknown territory. I say unknown in quotation marks because it's known to the African local populations. It's just not known to Europeans who are moving into these areas. So there's a whole series of surveys, expeditions, some by missionaries like David Livingstone, others by government officials, military officials, civil officials, all trying to move into new parts of the territory and to lay claim, or at least to reduce them in some way to a European style of rule. We should also include in this category the harbingers of European control, which are the great white hunters who are going out into the interior to go hunting, and they're the people who end up guiding or contracting with local guides to bring European armies into the interior. For example, the trip, the Pioneer Column, which went in 1890 from Mafeking up into what is now Zimbabwe. That's going to go north and found Fort Salisbury, modern-day Harare. Was led by a gentleman called Salu, white man, who had been wandering around this entire region for the best part of a decade, trying to learn local people and hunt, and then turns his knowledge to guide the white troops going into basically establishing what becomes a British colony of Rhodesia. And that's what this map is all about. It's a much later map. This is 1875. This is post-war 1950s. And it's actually published by, not by an official government, but by a gas company. Mobil Gas, also trying to sell a brand of gas called Vacuum. So this is the vacuum roadmap of the Rhodesias, which is to say Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, right? Nyasaland becomes Malawi, yeah. So the red lines now are the roads, blue for the rivers. Roads are now the preferred form of access with automobiles, they're easier to travel, but of course you need gasoline, so we got to have these kinds of maps to try and promote land travel by car, therefore consumption of their products. So it's partly helpful, partly advertisement, but probably based on a whole series of government maps made beforehand. And I just want to have the usual thing, and there's nothing on the back. So
Yeah. Okay. So if maybe to finish off this table, if we can just quickly look at the map of the Congo. I was just also very much interested in the depiction of it because there are sort of these racist depictions of it.
right.
And looking at the destabilization and the extraction of resources that has gone on in the Congo. And so how can you associate this type of mapping and the sort of extraction that happens in the Congo?
Okay, this is the first time I've seen this map, and I am truly horrified by it. It's vile. It's of this time. You know, Congo is this disaster story. When the Belgians finally left, they left a country that was thoroughly depleted and utterly unprepared for any kind of, quote, normal government. This reminds me of the huge maps on the wall of the huge Royal African Museum that Leopold established in Louvain in Belgium. Two very large galleries, and at either end of each gallery is a huge map of the Congo showing different aspects. This is trying to show ethnographic information, but is ethnography from a very European point of view, showing stereotypical people, various statues, I'm not going to say what for, musical instruments. It's hearkening to the European ethnographic idea that you can define a culture, you can summarize a culture by the things that it makes. Because archaeologically speaking, when we look at the archaeological record, what survives of past cultures are the artifacts. And so archaeologists have this attempt to try to piece together past societies from the kinds of pottery, the kinds of weapons, the kind of musical instruments that they leave behind. And ethnography in the 19th into the 20th century follows the same kind of pattern of using material culture as a way to categorize and define peoples today. There's a hint of music, masks, posed individuals, all of which are completely taken out of context. There's no understanding of the whole.
Yeah, it's sort of also exercising.
Yeah. It also has this rather weird bit. The title is Congo Nova Descriptio, which is sort of reminiscent of Renaissance maps. Nova Descriptio is Latin for a new description, new map, as if this is the new map of Congo, the newly revealed to the West. And again, this is for a European audience. It's published in Brussels. The legend is in French. There's a bit of Flemish.
And it's from which year? 1950?
1950 or so, yeah. So it's very much intended to go with the European viewpoint, in particular the Belgian viewpoint, of what is the nature of this land, which is a land of half-naked, warlike. Half the figures seem to be carrying spears or axes, but not sophisticated, not assimilated into Western practices. Although interestingly, we've got a couple of figures who seem to be white as opposed to Congolese, who I don't know what they might, this figure in particular.
Oh, or is that a mask? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's...
Okay.
It symbolizes all that was wrong with the Belgian Congo.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we are running out of time. So maybe we just do one last map. The last map is which I wanted to talk about pretty quickly is the submarine cables. Yeah, I'm interested in this map of these submarine cables because most importantly, I think it shows how it is communication between empire, the London metropole and its different colonies, but also from today's perspective, it is telegraphy from European centers, but it sort of created a digital divide whereby sort of the peripheries were left out of it. So I just wanted if you can talk about the submarine telecommunication cables and the history of mapping and how it sort of benefited empire.
Surely. This is a wonderful map for imaging the maritime nature of 19th, early 20th century European empires. It's actually showing a couple of things. In blue, all these blue lines are actually shipping routes. The red lines, which are much fainter, you can see them very clearly here, but also in the Northern Atlantic. The red lines are the submarine telegraph cables. So the fact that you've got a whole slew of them between Aden and Bombay, and then running up the Red Sea through Suez and across the Mediterranean, this is the British flow of information between Britain and India. And once you get to India, then you've got these overland connecting telegraph systems, so the information can go out to India and can be fed back through this key submarine network. Submarine telegraphs connect industrialized countries. First of all, the first one built was from the British Isles to North America, and then you start fitting in all the rest. But you can start to see them running from Lisbon, for example, down to Portuguese South America, which is, say, Brazil. You find them running all the way down to Cape Town, the center of British power in the South Atlantic, and then from South Africa out again up to India, and from India across down to Australia. Pacific is, they come from Fiji.
I think they're passing through New Zealand, so Australia.
Major line from New Zealand to Australia. So you're seeing this blue mesh is this network of shipping routes. Notice also saying for full-powered steam vessels. This is early 20th century. Steam vessels have been around for 50-odd years, but there's still a lot of sailing vessels, especially for shipping very large bulk goods like coal and iron ore, really heavy, low value, comparatively speaking, material. But the steam vessels are really coming in to take over even the sailing routes. And so with a steam vessel, you can go everywhere. And you have this incredible network just completely connecting up around the Pacific, around the Atlantic, around the Indian Oceans, connecting together the British, the French, the Dutch, for that matter, in some degree the German empires. And the flow of information in the red lines is a bit less pronounced, is a bit less pervasive, but is certainly truly important for how these whole systems work. And then around the map, we have these distance charts to show how far it is from points, in this case, along around the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, from Key West down to Cartagena and places in Guyana. So all these places, you can figure out what your distance is for these steam routes very quickly. Yeah, this is a very nice map. It's a federal production. At least it has a stamp in the top left corner, which suggests the U.S. Coast Survey, but it's actually been issued as a supplement to the National Geographic in 1905, which suggests that it is one of the maps that was tipped into the monthly National Geographic magazine that then went out to a very large number of people in America. So this is a U.S. map for U.S. general public consumption or for federal consumption, showing in 1905, which is 7 years after the annexation of the Philippines and of Puerto Rico, the consolidation, for that matter, at the same time of control in Hawaii, And so you can start to see the growth of the United States, which of course is in the middle of the map, as a Pacific power as well as an Atlantic power. So it's not just Europe. This is the United States now flexing its muscles as an imperial power.
Okay, so I mean, we've looked at some of these few examples of the things that you have in the collection, but there's a lot more. I mean, if people are interested, they can always come to see. But if you can just talk about the vision of the Osher Map Library and the Cartographic Center, where you want to take it, what kind of things you want to see, what you want to change, and sort of the challenges you have. And yeah, and I think we also live in sort of turbulent political times in terms of funding to the humanities, funding to this kind of research. Yeah, so how you see things going forward.
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's a challenging time to be the director of any cultural institution right now in the United States. There has been a lot of federal funding pulled back for the arts and the humanities and scholarships and the sciences and all sorts of things. And it's a really necessary time for this work. I would say for me, moving forward, as you can see, like with all these physical examples that we've been looking at, and certainly their digital counterparts online, in a time of massive erasure of online materials and scholarship, you can see this in the National Park Service in the United States. Websites have been changing. Federal websites with scientific information have been changing and has been pulled down. Physical collections, I think, are really important, because these are the physical things that people can come back to. With Born Digital, sometimes when it's gone, it's gone. That's also why it's really important to archive it. But even if someone was to erase the digital copies or if something happened, we'd still have the physical copies that people could see. And I think the vision is much of why you're here and what you're doing. So what you just did, looking at all of these maps that were of interest to you in your own work in the collection, this is what we do every day. Right? For students, if you're a third grader and you want to look at maps in comparison, we're going to pull them for you and have the same conversation, right? We want this to be a place of the free exchange of information where people can come and do the work that they need to do. And if you're teaching with us, right, like if you're a professor here or elsewhere and you're bringing your classes, say you were to teach a class and you were like, yeah, I want more maps of Ghana made in Ghana or Zimbabwe made in Zimbabwe, whatever, right? Then, because I need those to counter what we're seeing, then we buy those, right? Part of it is to get the multiplicity of perspectives. No one item by itself is ever going to tell you the whole story. A map, a photograph, a newspaper article, a document. It's all about putting them in conversation with other documents. So the more we can get that is representative of the work that people want to do to document specific times and specific places. This map that you were just looking at tells you so much about 1905, the world in 1905. So what is the map that's going to be able to tell you about the world and the fractured nature of the world in 2025, right? That doesn't exist yet. How are we going to encourage people to make that and to ask hard questions and to have hard conversations? Like, that's what we want when these come out, right? To have cross-cultural conversations, cross-cultural communications, to have hard conversations about why things look the way that they did, what it says about that time period, and what is the way to rectify it moving forward. But if you pulled, we probably have 100+ maps of the Holy Land, of Palestine, of Israel once it emerges as a state. If you looked at all of them, what you would see is change over time. And so then you have to ask questions about political borders and priorities and what nation states are doing in those interactions. No one map is going to tell you that. So it's really having all of them that people can come and freely access and discuss, whether in here or online. You know, I think it's in the United States anyways, in a term where everything is political. Maybe that's always true, but everything seems political right now. It's important to have these narratives and these conversations where, regardless of what you believe, you can come in here and do work, right? You can come in here and read. Maybe not every map's going to be for you. Maybe not every book's going to be for you. That's not the point. Like, the point is to have the collection to come and to do the work and to ask these questions and to have these conversations. And spaces where that can happen are increasingly jeopardized. And I'm really happy to work at a public university where that is really valued. Universities all over the United States are under attack, public and private. But to have the space to ask these hard questions and to do this work is something I think that's really worth defending. And that's the vision. So you can come here and continue to come here, and scholars from all over can continue to come here, and third graders can continue to come here, and high school students and university students, and see these things and use them for their work, whether that be geography or geology or environmental science or history or literature or whatever, right? This is the place. We believe very deeply in a principle that we call radical welcome. We want everybody to feel like this is a place where they can do the work that they want to do, regardless of what that work is, and to have these like civic dialogues that we like to model. And maps are really interesting in that way, because you can be looking at something that's 100 years old, 120 years old, 500 years old, and all of a sudden people are talking about the present, but they're doing it differently. Yeah. It's diffused a little bit because they're looking at the past and they're seeing the context and what led to it. And hopefully they can take that and go elsewhere and kind of model that work. So we're here to be open and accessible and to broaden our collections so that everybody who walks through the door feels like they are somehow represented in them. And that's not a short-term project.
I think that's a good
right. It's not a short-term project. We're in it for the long term.
Yes. I mean, it's always defending. And you also, I think you didn't mention it, but I think you told me that also a general audience, everyone is welcome.
Everyone is welcome.
Tourist or whatever.
Yeah. No, you do not need scholarly credentials to do work here. And that's really important to us too. Like, it's lifelong learning. You don't, just because, you're a scholar, that's great. You're welcome too. But so is the person off the street who just wants to see a map of their hometown or a place they're going to take a trip to. We're here for all of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. So I have been here at the Osher Map Library and Smith Cartographic Center. I've spent 4 days here doing research. And at the end of these interviews, after seeing all that I have seen and read all that I've read, I think there's just one thing that I would like to leave you with, a riddle. And the riddle says, what lived together in Osher and Farah ever after? That is Palestine and Israel. So these are the words for happiness, for joy, for bliss in either Hebrew or Arabic. I was just reading an article in Harris, the column Word of the Day, where they explain these homophones in Hebrew, Osher and Osher, which are given, as a blessing to wish people joy, happiness, bliss, and also, of course, wealth. Wealth, not so much as money, but as the idea of contentment and, of course, having enough to eat, which should be a right for everyone. At the end of my stay, I think I've seen a lot about maps, about the partition of Palestine. And I think this tells us so much about the conflicts that are going on in the world, about settler colonialism, the role it's played. And I think it tells us about the destabilization that is being experienced in the Middle East right now. And for all I can say that I think I myself, looking at all I've seen and thinking about what I've read, I think I am in support of the one-state solution. And I think the different people can come together and live together in Osher and Farah. And that's all that I just wanted to say.